This is Jilliana Ranicar-Breese, and this is part 2 of my conversation with Alex Pearson. So we're in China at the moment. We're in Beijing, another culture, the other side of the world. And you obviously took to it like a duck to water. So tell me about your life there.
Well, I loved it. I mean, it was a fascinating life. When I went in '92, there were not that many foreigners there. China was just beginning to kind of come out of the Cultural Revolution and the turmoil of the last 100 years. I was at the Conservatory of Music. There were only 9 non-Chinese. And that was, of course, fascinating. And I got to meet musicians who were coming in and being part of the kind of whole education of music. So that was amazing. But I suppose for me, it was also an amazing era, because if you wanted to do something, it probably wasn't there, so you had to do it. And
so you were a pioneer.
I suppose so. Yeah.
Oh yes.
Yeah. Somebody was saying the other day that, because I've always thought, maybe I was born bossy, but apparently it's different to being bossy.
It's being assertive.
It's being assertive, and I love to set things up, and I love to try new things, and I don't particularly mind if they don't work that well. I'll work it out.
You learn by your mistakes.
Yes.
Of course.
So, and China was just ready for that, and so there was...
What year was this?
92.
Okay.
So there was a gang of us that were very kind of like-minded in that. And so we set up several different projects or organisations or businesses.
Such as what?
Well, in the early days, we set up a place called the Poachers, which was kind of the biggest entertainment spot. And we showcased a lot of Chinese bands that became incredibly famous.
Was that in a club or a pub? Or
We made a pub/club, yeah.
Right. Members?
Nope.
No,
just kind of open. And then every night we did different things. So we had classical music there, which I kind of took control of. We had magic. We had, obviously, the bands. We had a lot of jazz, because that was a big thing at the time.
Okay.
So that was going on. And then at the same time, businesses were coming to China to see what could be done from the business side.
Yeah.
And this is where I began to kind of have 2 very distinct...
And where were what nationalities?
Every nationality.
Yeah.
Well, European and American, I would say mostly. Although there were Japanese as well. But certainly I was working mostly with the American and European.
Yeah, because of course they would have problems with the language and the culture gap. So they would need someone like you.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing was how to set their business up in the Chinese setting. Yeah, and of course China wanted it. This was Motorola, this is Nokia, this was, all of these big
boys.
The big boys. But they were not necessarily used to how the Chinese were doing. And same for the Chinese, they weren't used to how the Western business principles worked.
Yes.
So I began to work in that field very much with originally with an organisation called I Will Not Complain, which is a story in itself. And then eventually with my business partner, a Chinese chap called Leonard Liu, and we set up a consulting company that then went on to do a lot of training and consulting for organisations.
Were they more technological companies?
No, we worked with oil, we worked with Shell, BP, we worked with the Chambers of Commerce, and then we did a huge amount of work with government. On the creative thinking skills, we worked with a lot of government organisations, and big time with charities and NGOs that were also at that moment coming into China because they saw gaps and they saw where help was required. So DFID in those days was very big in China. They've sort of handed that over now to the Chinese, but so very diverse, which I loved. It wasn't just technology, as you say.
Yes.
It was everything. Yeah. Right. So that was going, and then I had the arts and music.
Completely contrasting.
But they were happening at the same time, which was just wonderful.
So were you sort of hosting foreign musicians and organising concerts?
Yes, quite early on.
Or even festivals, music festivals?
We didn't do I personally didn't do festivals so much, but we did. I started a choir, and then that grew, and then it was enormous, and then it needed an orchestra. So then it had an orchestra. And we did big concerts all over the place, and that was fun. And we had Chinese starting to join. We had a taxi driver who somebody in the choir had heard one day when he was just singing while driving. And I had to give him lessons in Latin, of course, because he didn't know how to pronounce the Latin words. And then from that, I opened a theatre called the Island Theatre, and then we did start to invite international people to come in. So we had opera singers, we had quartets, we had all sorts of actually really fabulously talented people on the art side.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you were an arts entrepreneur.
I don't know how to describe it. I think it's the sharing of ideas.
Yes.
So whether that be intellectual, whether that be musical, whether that be artistic, that's what thrills me, is just the sharing of something that stimulates.
Oh, an educator.
Yes, but not in the traditional sense of
Yeah,
education.
yeah. And then you moved over to books. You said that you started... tell me about... in a cafe it started.
Yeah,
yes?
it did. Yeah, I mean, I had a lot of books at home, and the thing about being in China was very difficult to buy English language books. So one would bring a lot over whenever you came back to England and go over there. And
what sort of books?
Well, I read a lot of fiction, but I also read quite a lot of non-fiction, actually. I love books about the human spirit, so anything about people like Shackleton, all these great heroic adventurers. So I had a lot of books at home, and I had this idea to start a little library.
Right.
But that was also a bar. You know, so again, you could share ideas, but you could borrow books.
Yes.
And that's how it started. And so I was like a hermit crab. I kind of went from a bar
in Beijing.
In Beijing, so a bar that existed that was somebody else's, to a restaurant that existed that was somebody else's.
Oh, so not only in one place, you were in several.
Well, I moved. I had to grow.
Fingers in lots of
pies. And then it was after the second one, we got knocked down for development, of course. And I think now Adidas sits on the venue where we were. And then I had to make a choice. Am I going to make a business out of this? And I realised, yes, let's give it a go.
How old were you at the time?
Well, it was...
Roughly?
15 years ago, so 35, 30, mid-30s, I would say.
Okay.
So then the Bookworm was born. And I have to be honest, at the beginning, I didn't know it was going to be successful. It was just a...
Well, it was a gap.
It was a gap.
You didn't have any competition.
But I wasn't driving it as a business. I was driving it as
it evolved.
Lovely venture that organically evolved. And more brilliant people started to get involved. And then I was in the position to invite really very spectacular authors of non-fiction, my heroes.
Such as who?
People who write about expeditions or write about biographies. And then out of that kind of came a festival, so then we started working very closely with the embassies to make sure that people were invited from different countries, because we are an international community. So we worked closely with the Icelandic, for example, and the Polish and the Mexican to bring in authors from those countries, as well as Scotland. You know, we worked very closely with the Edinburgh Book Festival.
But were all these in English?
The English ones were in English, and everything was done in English. And then actually towards the end, they might have been translated 2 or 3 languages. But we tried to stipulate that to keep it simple until it got to the point where we had enough interpreters.
And did you get into publishing as well?
I published a book that I kind of did with a mate of mine and 14 very talented writers in Beijing. And now my business partner, Peter, has got a publishing wing to the Bookworm.
Is this the Irishman you mentioned?
Yeah.
Yes.
And so part of our role really with the Bookworm was not just showcasing Western authors to China so that there was a share of ideas, but also showcasing Chinese authors to the West. Because, of course, there's a lot of brilliant authors in China, but nobody had heard of them. And you can't read them because they're in Chinese.
Of course.
So we needed to have some sort of a bridge between that and the Western publishing houses so that things could be shared properly.
Right. Okay, well, we'll come back in part 3 to see how things go.